AITA for accusing my ex-wife of abusing her 6-year-old by forcing her onto a strict vegan diet that left her tired, anxious, and terrified of animals. I, 30M, share custody of my daughter Diane, 6F, with my ex-wife, 46F. Our history is messy and, honestly, a little unconventional from the start. I was 22 when I met her. She was older, already established in her career, and I was flattered that someone like her would even give me the time of day. We dated for a short while, got married when I was 24, and Diane was born not long after. By the time I was 25, the marriage had fallen apart, and we divorced. Looking back, I think we rushed into things. At the time, I thought the age gap didn't matter, but now I see how differently we approach life. I was barely figuring out who I was, while she already had strong opinions about how everything in a household should run. Those differences became obvious after Diane was born, and our rocky foundation just couldn't hold. Near the end of our relationship, my ex made a huge lifestyle shift. Almost overnight, she decided to become vegan. At first, I respected her choice. I've never had an issue with someone choosing their own diet. But what I couldn't handle was how she immediately expected everyone else, including me, our daughter, and even our 2 dogs, to follow her down the same path. She bought this amazing vegan dog food that made both dogs sick for an entire day. It wasn't just about her being vegan. It was about her trying to turn our whole family into a vegan household, regardless of how we felt about it. Diane, even as a little kid, hated the food. She would push it away, cry, or sneak bites from my plate. And I'll admit it, I hated it too. I didn't like the taste, and I didn't like being told I was a bad person for not following along. My ex and I fought constantly over food, which sounds ridiculous now, but it was just one of many symptoms of how incompatible we'd become. When the divorce was finalized, the court gave us a custody split. Diane spends the weekdays with her mom and comes to me on weekends. It's not my favorite arrangement, but it's the one we've been working with. For a while, it seemed manageable. During the week, my ex had her rules. During the weekend, I had mine. But things shifted again after she remarried. Her new husband is also vegan, and ever since he came into the picture, the push for Diane to live a fully vegan lifestyle went from a suggestion to a strict rule. Suddenly, it wasn't just my ex casually offering plant-based meals. It was a full household mandate. Diane was no longer allowed meat, eggs, or dairy when she was with them, and my ex began pressuring me to enforce the same rules in my home. I refused, not because I wanted to be difficult, but because I could see my daughter wasn't happy. She didn't want to eat that way, and I wasn't about to make my weekend with her miserable by forcing food she hated. To me, it wasn't just about diet, it was about giving her a break, a place where she could relax and just be a kid. What I didn't realize was how far this would go, or how deeply it would affect Diane, not just physically but emotionally. At first, when my ex remarried and Diane's stepdad entered the picture, I didn't think too much of it. I figured it was just another adjustment my daughter would have to make, different routines at mom's house versus mine. That's not unusual for divorced families. But it didn't take long before I realized this wasn't just another small change. It was a complete overhaul of her diet and lifestyle. Whenever Diane was with her mom and stepdad, she was put on a fully vegan diet. It wasn't just about skipping meat. It was about eliminating eggs, dairy, and anything that could be remotely connected to animals. When I'd pick her up on Fridays, I noticed she looked more tired than before. Her cheeks were pale, and she moved slower. She used to run out to my truck with a big smile and endless chatter about her week, but now she trudged out groggy, dragging her backpack behind her. It wasn't just physical. Her mood changed, too. Diane had always been an energetic, playful kid, the type to giggle at silly jokes, get excited over crafts, and beg to play with our dogs the second she came through the door. But lately, she was irritable. She snapped at little things. She cried more often. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just the stress of bouncing between 2 households, but as the weeks went on, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One weekend, I made her favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. The second I put the plate in front of her, she burst into tears. Not just a small pout, but sobbing. She cried that eating eggs was stealing babies from the chickens. She begged me not to hurt the hens in my backyard. This was the same child who used to love helping me gather eggs, who had proudly named each of our 11 hens, who once drew pictures of herself playing with them. Now she looked at me like I was some kind of monster. It didn't stop there. She cried when she saw honey in the pantry, saying it meant I was abusing bees. She cried if one of my dogs chased a squirrel, because it was hurting animals. She even refused to color with crayons, because she said making them involved hurting animals somewhere in the process. I knew my ex was educating her about veganism, but what I didn't expect was how extreme it had become. This wasn't just about diet anymore. It was fear, guilt, and sadness creeping into every part of her life. Diane was being taught to see cruelty in everything around her. On top of that, I started noticing real health concerns. She was groggy all the time, dragging her feet, saying she felt too tired to play. She got irritable over the smallest things. It wasn't just her mood, it was her body. Something wasn't right. I tried to brush away my fears, thinking maybe she was just going through a phase, or maybe it was school stress. But as the months passed, I couldn't ignore the pattern. During the week, when she was on her mom's strict vegan diet, she came back to me looking pale and exhausted. By Sunday evening, after eating normally and having a fun weekend, she seemed brighter, happier, more like herself. Then Monday would roll around, and the cycle would start again. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to respect her mom's choices without overstepping, but I couldn't ignore what I was seeing in my daughter. And as much as my ex insisted the diet is healthy, it sure didn't look that way to me. The part that scared me most wasn't just Diane's lack of energy or her pale face. It was how deeply these new ideas were taking root in her mind. She wasn't just eating differently. She was changing into a completely different child, one weighed down by guilt and fear over everything around her. Diane had always been such a happy kid. She loved to play outside, make silly crafts, laugh at jokes, and help me take care of her little backyard farm. My hens were her favorite. She gave each one a name: Sunshine, Clover, Daisy, Nugget, and she would proudly carry a basket to collect eggs. She used to run up to me, smiling ear to ear, holding out the warm eggs like they were treasures. She'd draw pictures of herself with the chickens and color them in bright, happy shades. But that little girl is gone now. The last few months, every time she comes over and sees the hens, she cries. She begs me to stop stealing their babies. She pleads with me to let the chickens keep their eggs, even though I've explained, gently, that without a rooster, they'll never hatch into chicks. I told her the eggs would just go to waste if we didn't collect them, and that the hens are happy and healthy. But she doesn't hear me. All she sees are victims, and she sees me as their abuser. The same thing happens with almost everything. She opens my pantry and cries if she sees a carton of milk. She points to a jar of honey and says I'm hurting bees. She refuses crayons because, according to her, animals were harmed to make them. She even breaks down if my dogs chase a squirrel, sobbing that animals are being hurt and it's our fault for letting it happen. It's not just sadness, it's constant anxiety. She's living in a world where cruelty exists everywhere she looks, because that's what's been drilled into her. She doesn't just avoid food or objects. She reacts like the weight of the world is on her small shoulders. She's 6 years old. She shouldn't be carrying guilt like this. The worst part is how she looks at me now. My own daughter, who used to think I was her hero, who used to laugh and run into my arms, sometimes looks at me like I'm a monster. She tells me I'm hurting chickens and abusing animals. She cries when I make her a normal meal. It feels like I'm losing her, not just to my ex's diet, but to an entire mindset that paints me as the villain. I know kids go through phases, and I know they're impressionable, but this doesn't feel like a phase. It feels like indoctrination, and I don't use that word lightly. She isn't being given the tools to make informed choices. She's being fed one worldview so intensely that she can't see anything else. I can handle my ex making her own choices. If she wants to be vegan, fine, but forcing it on Diane in a way that affects not just her body, but her mind and emotions, that's what makes my blood boil. Every time Diane cries, every time she begs me to stop hurting animals, I feel like I'm losing more of the little girl I used to know. The bright, carefree kid is slipping away, replaced by a child weighed down by fear and sadness. And no matter how hard I try to reassure her, it feels like my words don't matter, because at her mom's house, she's being told the opposite. Eventually, I couldn't just sit with my worries anymore. Watching Diane's health and happiness decline week after week while feeling powerless, it was eating me alive. I decided I had to bring it up directly with my ex. I didn't expect it to go smoothly. In fact, I knew it probably wouldn't. But I also knew that if I stayed quiet, things were only going to get worse for my daughter. One Friday evening, when I went to pick up Diane, I asked my ex if we could talk before she came outside. My stomach was in knots, but I told myself this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about protecting my kid. I started by asking about what she's been teaching Diane regarding veganism. My ex gave me this calm but condescending smile and said she was simply educating our daughter on the truth. She admitted she'd explained in detail how farm animals suffer and how eating animal products is cruelty. I pushed further. Are you telling her that I'm an animal abuser? I asked. Her response made my blood run cold. She didn't deny it. She just shrugged and said, if she comes to that conclusion based on the truth, that's on her. That's when I realized this wasn't just about food anymore. It wasn't even about health. It was about shaping Diane's worldview to see me, the person who loves and cares for her every day, as the villain. I tried to keep calm, but I also asked her if she had been monitoring Diane's health. I laid out what I'd noticed: the grogginess, the irritability, the constant sadness. My ex brushed me off and said it wasn't my concern and that the diet was perfectly healthy. Hearing those words lit a fire in me. It is my concern, I snapped. She's my daughter too, and if she's constantly tired, constantly upset, and refusing to enjoy anything she used to love, then something isn't right. My ex's tone shifted from calm to defensive. She accused me of undermining her parenting, of trying to poison Diane with animal products, of refusing to respect their household rules. That's when I lost my cool. I told her point blank, this is abuse. Forcing a 6-year-old into a lifestyle she doesn't want, making her believe her father is some kind of monster, and ignoring her health, that's abuse. The second the word left my mouth, she exploded. She screamed that I had no right to call her abusive, that I was ignorant, cruel, and threatened by the fact that she was raising Diane with morals. I screamed back. I'm not proud of that part. The argument spiraled fast. Thankfully, Diane was still inside the house, getting her things together. She didn't hear the worst of it. The shouting stopped the moment she came outside, backpack slung over her shoulder, looking so small and tired. I didn't want her to see us like that, so I bit my tongue, took her hand, and walked her to the car. The ride home was quiet. She hummed softly to herself in the back seat, but I couldn't shake the rage boiling in my chest. My ex wasn't just ignoring my concerns. She was actively dismissing them, painting me as the enemy in Diane's eyes, and justifying it all under the banner of the truth. That night, I replayed the argument in my head over and over. I hated that I yelled. I hated that it turned ugly. But I also couldn't deny that I meant what I said. Forcing Diane into a rigid lifestyle that makes her miserable while feeding her fear and guilt, that felt like abuse to me. After that argument at my ex's house, I figured things would cool off. Maybe she'd reflect on what I said, or at least avoid escalating the conflict. But of course, that's not what happened. The very next week, I started getting messages from my extended family, people I hardly speak to anymore. For context, I've been low contact with most of them for years. When I was a teenager, I dated a guy, and my family didn't take kindly to it. Later, when I divorced my ex, they decided I was throwing away a good thing. We've had a long history of judgment, disapproval, and them siding with whoever stands against me. So it didn't surprise me when they came down on my ex's side this time too. What had surprised me was how quickly she involved them. She painted the whole situation as me being cruel to the mother of my child. And sure enough, my phone was blowing up with texts and voicemails telling me to be more understanding, to stop making trouble, and to think about Diane's well-being. One aunt in particular called and lectured me for nearly 20 minutes about how a vegan diet is perfectly healthy, and you're just bitter because she's remarried. I tried to cut in, tried to explain that my concern wasn't about veganism itself, but about the way Diane was reacting, her exhaustion, her sadness, her fear of everything around her. But they didn't want to hear it. To them, it was black and white. I had lashed out at my ex, therefore I was in the wrong. The part that hurt most was realizing my ex was using the family I barely speak to as reinforcements in her fight. Instead of focusing on our daughter, she was rallying outside voices to shame me. It made me feel even more isolated, like I was standing completely alone in this, just me and my instincts that something isn't right with my little girl. And those instincts, they're screaming at me louder every day. When Diane comes over, she looks drained. She barely wants to play, barely wants to eat. She's constantly worried about hurting animals, even when she's just trying to color with crayons. It breaks my heart to see her childhood slipping away into this cloud of fear and guilt. I'll admit, I've second-guessed myself since the fight. I replayed the moment I yelled, the word abuse echoing in my head. Did I go too far? Should I have stayed calmer, try to reason with her instead of exploding? Probably. I'm not proud of losing my temper. But when I look at Diane, when I see her trembling lip as she asks me not to steal from the chickens, I can't help but feel my anger was justified. I don't care what my ex eats. I don't care what her husband eats. That's their choice. But when their choice starts bleeding into Diane's health and happiness, when it turns her against me and makes her afraid of the world around her, then it becomes my concern. So no, I don't feel guilty for calling it what I see it as. I do feel guilty for yelling, for stooping to that level in front of my ex. But I don't regret standing up for my daughter. Now, with my family against me and my ex digging her heels in, I'm left wondering if I'm the only one who sees how damaging this is. Maybe I'm too close to it. Maybe my love for Diane blinds me. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that I'm right to fight this battle, even if it means fighting alone. Now I'm sitting here, torn between guilt and conviction. On one hand, I know I shouldn't have screamed. I lost control in that moment, and that's not the kind of father I want Diane to see. I've always promised myself that no matter what happens between her mom and me, I'd never drag our fights into her world. On that front, I failed. But on the other hand, I can't ignore what's happening. My daughter used to be so full of life, laughing, playing, chasing the dogs around the yard, helping me gather eggs from the hens. Now she's pale, exhausted, anxious, and convinced the world is filled with cruelty at every turn. She's 6. She should be drawing with crayons, not crying over them because she thinks they hurt animals. I don't care what my ex or her husband eat. They can live however they want. But when their choices start to affect Diane's health and mental well-being. When they make her afraid of her own dad, I can't just stand by. I had to say something. And yes, in that heated moment, I called it what I believe it is: abuse. My family thinks I'm cruel. My ex thinks I'm ignorant. I think I'm just a dad trying to protect his kid. So, AITA for accusing my ex-wife of abusing our daughter by forcing a vegan diet on her and filling her head with fear and guilt?